Tonight, you get to witness Jasmine Crockett receive an insult that no one ever gets to hear on live TV, and then turn it into the most iconic comeback of her career. The cameras went live. The lights shone bright. A shiny studio provided the backdrop for what at first glance seemed like an ordinary live debate. The issue for the night was presented in objective terms: political scandal and the increasing issue of family control within the White House. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing the viewers hadn't already heard. The host sitting at the head of the table welcomed the guests individually. To his right said Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Her reputation preceded her. She was the type of woman who never gave up, the kind whose voice held fire and clarity. She seemed primed for tonight. A serene smile, shoulders back, eyes piercing, her entire posture screamed, "I am ready." Across the room sat Barron Trump, tall, calm, with the unmistakable air of his surname. While younger than many in the room, Barron exuded a quiet confidence, as if merely being a Trump provided him a cloak of authority. His unruffled face implied that he was prepared to be the provocateur, the one who agitates the pot when others are trying to keep it calm. The viewers at home witnessed two men sitting across each other, each embodying more than themselves. Jasmine, the quick-witted congresswoman, never afraid to throw down. Barron, the scion of a political dynasty, his father being the current president. Both had weight, but of very different kinds. Initially, the discussion was easy. The host posed questions regarding policy, regarding how much sway family members should wield in the everyday functioning of government. Jasmine replied confidently, laying out in words how transparency led to trust. She chose every word with care, constructing her case in a series of linked sentences, like a bricklayer placing stones. Barron replied in a different tone. He was lighter, nearly informal, as though the discussion was simply an evening chat at the dinner table. He smiled a couple of times, threw in the occasional remark with a dash of sarcasm, and even praised Jasmine for her vitality. The crowd laughed, getting into the flow. For a moment it was almost like both camps had discovered equilibrium. Mutual respect, however, fleeted. The host nodded along, looking glad that the conversation was going forward without explosions. But beneath the placid exterior, something else was on the boil. You could catch it in the way Barron leaned forward just a fraction each time Jasmine opened her mouth. You could catch it in the way Jasmine's eyes sharpened, catching on the undertone of his words. The cameras picked up on tiny details. Jasmine's hand resting firmly on the table. Barron's brief smile when the host probed White House involvement. They were small signs, but they had meaning. This tranquility wouldn't continue. The studio itself seemed to feel it. The audience sat a bit straighter in their chairs. The tension changed, almost imperceptible, but certain, like the quiet before a storm. The host, oblivious to what was about to happen, continued with another question regarding political credentials. He looked first at Jasmine, who offered a consistent, reflective response. He then looked at Barron, and that's when the vibe shifted. The smile stayed on Barron's face, one beat too long. His eyes grew hard. He leaned against the microphone, his tone picking up a icier tone. The tension in the room was now palpable. Everyone who saw it sensed it. The equilibrium was shattering. What started as a peaceful debate was on the verge of turning into something much more dramatic, something that would leave the viewers agog, the host dumbfounded, and Jasmine Crockett standing in the middle of a moment nobody would ever forget. And it would all begin with one stunning insult. The question did not sound particularly threatening. The host leaned forward, smoothing his papers, and inquired of Barron to offer his opinion about what constitutes an able leader in the political climate of today. Barron hesitated. He did not respond immediately. Rather, he tilted his head a trifle, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. For an instant it seemed as if he were weighing whether to deliver the honed answer, or to allow his unvarnished thoughts to tumble out. The quiet lengthened. The studio fell quiet then, in a firm but acid tone. Barron spoke. He did not criticize policy. He did not argue points. He targeted Jasmine in sooth. He said, his voice smooth but edged, "I don't even believe you're qualified to sit there. Your record is thin compared to mine. You sound crazy, not rational. If I'm honest with you, you can use less time in politics and perhaps more time in a psychiatric hospital." The words crashed like a thunderclap. There is stunned silence for a moment. You could hear the collective gasp from the studio audience. The host's jaw clenched, his eyes nervously flicking between Barron and Jasmine, as though looking for a means of deflecting the conversation into safer territory. But it was too late. The punch had connected. It was not a careless insult. It was deliberate, personal, and heartless. A direct hit intended not just to diminish Jasmine's wit, but to cut down her dignity before a paying audience. Jasmine was motionless, her expression inscrutable at first, but beneath her calm exterior, there burned fire. You could see the flash in her eye. That combination of anger and hurt that happens when someone does something you never believed they'd have the nerve to do. The audience shifted in their seats. Some gasped, some whispered as the cameras closed in, capturing every inch of tension. This was not polite panel anymore. This was a war zone, and Barron had just launched the first grenade. Barron slumped into his chair, near satisfied, his grin spread wide as if he had landed a witty punch. He anticipated Jasmine to cower, to falter, perhaps even lose it. That was the trap. He wanted to take over the stage. He sought to quiet her by putting her in an emotional corner. But quiet doesn't last long in situations like these. The host attempted to interrupt, clearing his throat. "Let's try to keep this civil," he started, but the sentence crumbled under the burden of what had just transpired. Civil. The tension was already charged, created by confrontation, and Jasmine understood. She leaned forward gradually, her hand on the table with a forceful press. She took no time in responding. She allowed the pause to lengthen, allowed the crowd to sense the tension building tighter and tighter. The room was on edge, anticipating her next words, wondering if she would crack or if she would struggle. Her lips formed a held smile, not one of laughter, but one of rebellion. She met Barron's eyes. What followed would be more than a counter. It would be so shocking, so unanticipated, that it would turn the whole stage on its head. The insult had been vicious, but Jasmine was set to retaliate with something more deadly, something more hurtful than anything implied by weakness or instability. One question, one that would compel Barron Trump to answer the deepest and most contentious secrets of his own dynasty. And when it had crossed her lips, the whole country would be having a conversation about it. For a moment, Jasmine Crockett remained silent. She did not move, her hands strong on the table, her eyes fixed on empty like a laser. The air was thick with silence, but it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a storm building. The stillness before lightning tears the air a thunder. Barron sneered again, as if assured that his jibe had knocked her off her feet. He sat back secure, expecting her to falter. Jasmine was not faltering. She was measured. The crowd could sense it, the manner in which her shoulders remained firm, the way her jaw clenched, the way her face relaxed from shock into rigid defiance. She wasn't going to be defined by his words. No, she was on the verge of redefining the entire discussion. Gradually, she edged closer to her microphone, her voice when it eventually emerged, steady but biting, each word carved out with precision, like the snap of a whip. "You think you can challenge my credentials, Barron? You think you can denigrate my intelligence and cover behind your last name?" Barron's smirk faltered just a fraction. Jasmine's voice became more forceful, sounding clear across the studio. "You have come here to humiliate me. But here's something that the American people really want to know, and perhaps you should respond to it." She paused. The silence hung heavy with expectation. The audience leaned forward, the host froze, and even the cameras crept closer, sensing what was coming. Then Jasmine gave it to him. The question that would cut through Barron's sneer through the walls of the studio, and resound far beyond that stage. "Tell us, Barron, who's your mom, Ivanka or Melania?" "Sage, tell us, Barron, who's your mom, Ivanka or Melania?" Gasps from the audience. The host's eyes widened, his hand half raised as if to intervene. But too late. The words were out, weighty and irrevocable. The effect was instantaneous. Barron's confidence shattered. His smirk crumbled into a stiff look, his posture uneasily shifting in his seat. He hadn't anticipated this. He hadn't prepared for this. The question wasn't about family. It was about power. It was about influence. And it was about pulling back the curtain on the shadows of the Trump home. The whispers of Ivanka's oversized role, Melania's quieter presence, and the blurred lines between personal fidelity and political control. Jasmine had turned his mean insult around and turned it into a moment of burning exposure. She wasn't questioning his intelligence or his mental status. She was questioning the very essence of his identity on national TV. The audience couldn't help but watch. Some sat petrified in shock. Others whispered to each other, flabbergasted that someone dared say those words aloud. And Barron, he attempted to retort. He opened his mouth, but no coherent words first. He stuttered, struggling to find a way to deflect, to redirect, to shift the spotlight away from himself back onto Jasmine. But in that instant, the damage was done. The dynamic on the stage had been altered. Jasmine relaxed into her chair, her gaze never leaving Barron's face. She didn't need to say anything else. Her question hung suspended in the air like a blade hovering above the table, daring him to grasp it, daring him to respond. The host finally intervened, his voice trembling as he attempted to redirect the conversation elsewhere. But everyone knew the conversation had forever changed. Barron had launched the first salvo with his insult, but Jasmine had responded with a blow so crushing, so personal that it turned the entire stage around. It wasn't a comeback. It was a revelation, and Barron Trump had no idea how to get out of it. The studio air was heavy. Jasmine's question, "Who's your mom, Ivanka or Melania?" still hung in the air like storm after lightning. The crowd sat in shock, waiting for Barron to reply. His gaze flashed toward the host, then settled back on Jasmine. His once honed composure had started to crack. For the first time during that evening, he appeared ruffled. Barron leaned into his mic, his voice tight, but potent. "That question is absurd." He attempted to sound assertive. "You're simply attempting to deflect because you don't have actual arguments. You're fixated on my family. Perhaps you should pay attention to your own mental state, rather than spewing out wild accusations." It was an old trick. Shift, deflect, attack. He was attempting to turn the debate back on Jasmine and try to make her appear crazy, trying to get the audience to forget the bite of her question. But Jasmine didn't bat an eye. She leaned her head to one side, a knowing but serene smile curving her lip. She let him finish, gave him every rope he required, and then when he fell silent, she leaned forward again. "Barron," she said firmly, her voice heavy with import that stilled the rumors in the room, "this has nothing to do with me. This is about transparency, about the American people being aware of who actually wields power within the White House." The host appeared strained, caught between interrupting and allowing the exchange to continue. The cameras close and tighter, capturing every look. Barron's discomforts Jasmine's composure. The audience stuck on the brink of their seats. Jasmine pressed on, each word careful, every syllable focused like an arrow. "Everybody can see it. Melania has been quiet, practically invisible as First Lady. But Ivanka has walked into meetings, briefed on policy, sat with your father in places where she was not supposed to be. The question is not a personal one. It's political. Who is dictating decisions? Who wields the influence? The people have the right to know." Barron adjusted in his seat. He started to open his mouth as if to interrupt, but Jasmine cut him off. "You attempted to belittle me, to question my intelligence, to inform me that I don't belong. But let's be real. This is not about you or me. This is about power. This is about a daughter who has been placed into the position of an advisor." When the actual First Lady is standing in the wings, gasps ran through the crowd once more. The tension had become more razor-sharp, heavier. Jasmine was not giving up. She was creating a case right there on live TV. Barron held up his hand, his voice cut sharper now. "That's ridiculous. You're taking everything out of context to personally attack my family. This is not being transparent. It's mere slander. You're embarrassing yourself." But even as he said that, his voice quavered with frustration. His previous swagger was lost to be replaced by defensiveness. The smirk was absent. Jasmine did not yell. She did not need to. "Call it what you will," she answered curtly. But the American people noticed the difference. They noticed the odd burden Ivanka bears over Melania, and they are fully entitled to ask why. "I am not here to defame you, Barron. I'm here to demand truth for all the citizens who are watching. The host squirmed awkwardly, sensing that the show had strayed far from its scripted format. But the audience was not fidgety. They were Jasmine had taken what began as a vicious personal assault and made it something far greater. Barron had attempted to deflect, to manipulate, to shut her down with slurs, but his sidestepping only served to underscore the very point she was establishing, that there were issues of power within the Trump family that had never been resolved. The power dynamics on that stage had changed completely. Jasmine was no longer simply standing up for herself. She was taking the floor. She was holding the truth, and she was holding Barron responsible before the whole country, and the impact of her words could not be denied. The studio still hummed with tension from the confrontation. Barron sat stiff in his chair, visibly rattled by Jasmine's pointed questions and unwavering poise. The host fidgeted with his notes, not quite sure how to guide the broadcast back into neutral territory. But Jasmine, no way. She was in control now, and she had no intention of relinquishing it. She leaned forward, her eyes locked, her voice steady, but charged with conviction. This was not a mere back and forth anymore. It was a message to all the people who watched, not only to those of us in the studio, but to millions of Americans who watched at home with their eyes fixed on their screens. You know, she started slowly, her voice with a kind of gravity that pulls silence. Tonight was never about me or about Barron. It's about something far greater. It's about who actually makes the decisions in our nation. Decisions that affect every single American life. The crowd went silent once more. This time not because they were shocked, but because they were concentrating. They were listening, hanging on my every word. Barron attempted to insult me. She went on, her voice unshakable. He tried to make me appear unqualified, unstable, unworthy. But let's be definite. This is not a discussion about whether Jasmine Crockett deserves to sit at the table. It's about why the American people are kept in the dark about who really sits at the head of it. She paused again, allowing the words to register. Her eyes flicked briefly towards Barron, then back on camera. Transparency, she said definitively. That's the word. That's the problem. Transparency in who wields power. Transparency in the decision-making process. Because without it, democracy is a performance, rather than a reality. Barron shifted restlessly, his arms crossed. But Jasmine didn't let up. Her tone built like a wave gathering force as it hit the shore. We've all witnessed it. The fuzzy boundaries, the unprecedented power Ivanka Trump has wielded compared to Melania. The manner in which power does not always reside with official titles, but goes behind the closed door into the hands of individuals with private access. That is what this is ultimately about. Not gossip, not rumor, but power and the people's right to know who possesses it. A buzz ran through the crowd, not gasps this time, but a soft buzz of affirmation. Heads nodded, faces set with resolve. Jasmine inched forward, nearly talking directly into the living rooms of all the viewers. This isn't about parties. This isn't about labels. It's about trust. If Americans don't trust the transparency of their own leaders, how can they trust the choices being made in their name? That's why I asked it. That's why I argued back tonight. Because somebody has to. Because silence fuels secrecy. She pushed back her shoulders, a look of firm determination and resolute on her face. So, let me be clear. The American people deserve the truth. They deserve honesty regarding who is defining their future. And if asking uncomfortable questions makes people uneasy, then so be it. I will never apologize for holding people accountable. Not Barron Trump, not his father, not anyone in power. The words echoed around the studio like a bell. Firm, last, unshakable. The host sat silent, not knowing how to end the broadcast after such a declaration. Barron looked straight ahead, his previous brashness now given way to silence. And the crowd, they burst. Not in laughter, not in whispers, but in a wave of claps that rocked the studio. Jasmine did not smile. She did not smirk. She just sat back, serene and unruffled, her eyes still fixed on the camera. Her last words rang out, resonating long after the applause faded away. This is not about politics. This is about America, and Americans are entitled to know who really wields the pen that writes their destiny. The cameras locked on her face, recording the strength of the moment, a moment that would outlive the confines of that studio.